The dust devil that whipped through the makeshift camp at the edge of Abilene, Kansas, on that scorching July afternoon in 1872, brought with it the sound of whimpering so pitiful that Eleanor Brennan dropped the wet petticoat she had been wringing out and rushed toward the noise without a second thought. What she found beneath the gnarled cottonwood tree made her heart clench with a fierce protectiveness she had not felt in the 3 years since her husband died fighting Comanche raiders far south of their homestead. The hound was ancient, his muzzle grayed with age, ribs showing through matted fur, and one leg bent at an unnatural angle that made her wince, blood crusted around a gash on his shoulder. And when his eyes opened to look at her, she saw in them such trust and resignation that tears sprang to her own eyes. Eleanor knelt in the dust, heedless of her already worn calico dress, and reached out slowly to let the dog smell her hand. His tail gave the faintest twitch, and she took that as permission to examine him more closely. The leg was not broken, she realized with relief, but badly sprained, and the shoulder wound, while ugly, was not deep enough to be mortal if she could keep infection at bay. She had nursed her younger brothers through fevers and injuries back in Missouri before the war, and then her husband through countless scrapes during their brief marriage. The skills had stayed with her even as everything else in her life had crumbled away. "Easy now," she murmured, her voice low and soothing as she carefully slid her arms beneath the dog. He was heavier than she expected, solid muscle beneath the neglected coat, and she staggered slightly as she stood. The walk back to her wagon seemed longer than it had any right to be, her arms burning with effort, but she refused to set him down until she reached the shade of her canvas cover. She had little enough in terms of supplies. The journey from Missouri to Kansas had depleted most of what she owned, and the small amount of money she had gotten from selling her homestead had gone toward the wagon and team. But she had water, precious as it was, and she had clean cloth that she had been saving for bandages. She had learned the hard way that the frontier demanded preparedness for every possible calamity. Eleanor worked through the afternoon as the sun beat down mercilessly, and the other travelers in the temporary camp went about their business. Some glanced her way with curiosity, but most were too concerned with their own troubles to pay much attention to a widow woman tending a stray dog. She cleaned the wound with careful precision, using water she boiled over her small fire, and bound the leg with splints made from barrel staves she begged off a passing freight hauler. The dog bore it all with stoic patience, only whimpering when she had to probe the gash to ensure no dirt remained embedded in the torn flesh. "There now," she told him when she finished, sitting back on her heels and wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "You will mend, I think, if you're willing to fight for it." The hound's tail thumped against the wagon bed, and Eleanor found herself smiling for the first time in longer than she could remember. She fetched water in a shallow pan and watched as he lapped at it eagerly, then tore up pieces of the salt pork she had been rationing for herself and offered them one by one. He ate with better appetite than his condition suggested he should have, and she took that as a good sign. Night fell with the suddenness common to the plains, the temperature dropping enough to make her shiver in her thin dress. Eleanor wrapped herself in a blanket and settled near the dog, one hand resting on his side so she could feel the steady rise and fall of his breathing. She dozed fitfully, waking at every sound, and it was during one of these wakeful periods just before dawn that she heard the horse approaching. The rider came slowly as though searching for something, and Eleanor's hand instinctively went to the old pistol she kept beneath her makeshift pillow. She had never fired it at another human being, but she knew how if necessity demanded it. The frontier had taught her that much at least. "Blue?" The voice was male, rough with exhaustion, and something that might have been grief. "Blue, you old fool, where did you get to?" The hound's ears perked up, and he tried to lift his head, letting out a soft bark that was more wheeze than anything else. The rider's silhouette stiffened, and then he was swinging down from the saddle with practiced ease, boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. "Who is there?" Eleanor called out, her voice steadier than she felt. She did not raise the pistol, not yet, but her finger rested near the trigger. "Name is Cole Maddox, ma'am," the man said, stopping a respectful distance away. "I am looking for my dog. Old Blue disappeared 2 days back when we were chasing down some strays. I have been tracking him ever since." He paused, and she heard him remove his hat. "I heard him just now. Is he with you?" Eleanor relaxed slightly, though she did not release the gun. "If Blue is a hound with gray on his muzzle and a sprained leg, then yes, he is here. I found him yesterday afternoon in bad shape." The man took a step closer, and in the growing light of dawn, Eleanor could make out his features. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting, and several days' worth of beard shadowing his jaw. His clothes marked him as a working cowboy, worn but well-maintained, and the gun at his hip sat in a holster that showed signs of frequent use. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, dark and intense, filled with worry as he looked past her to where the dog lay. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the wagon. Eleanor nodded and moved aside, though she kept the pistol within reach. Cole Maddox approached slowly and dropped to his knees beside the hound, his large hands moving over the animal with surprising gentleness. Blue whined and licked at his master's wrist, his tail beating a weak rhythm against the blanket Eleanor had laid down. "What happened to him?" Cole asked, his voice tight. "I was hoping you could tell me," Eleanor replied. "I found him beneath a cottonwood tree, injured and half-starved. The shoulder wound looked fresh, perhaps a day old at most. The leg was sprained badly enough that he could not walk on it." Cole's jaw clenched, and his hand stilled on the dog's head. "We ran into trouble with some rustlers 2 nights back. Blue went after one of them when he tried to scatter the herd. I heard shots, and when I got there, the man was gone and so was Blue. I searched until dark and then again at first light, but I could not find him." He looked up at her then, and Eleanor saw the moisture that made his eyes shine. "I thought he was dead. 13 years I have had this dog since he was a pup. I thought I had lost him." Something in Eleanor's chest loosened at the naked emotion in the cowboy's voice. She had known men who treated their animals as property, tools to be used and discarded when they outlived their usefulness. This man clearly loved his hound with a depth that spoke well of his character. "He is a fighter," she said softly. "With rest and care, he should recover." Cole turned his attention back to the dog, examining the bandages she had applied. "You did all this?" There was wonder in his voice now, mixed with disbelief. "The wound is clean. The binding is proper. Are you a doctor?" Eleanor almost laughed at that. "No, just a woman who has had to learn doctoring out of necessity. I have 5 younger brothers back in Missouri, and I spent my childhood patching them up after one scrape or another. My husband was a ranger, and he came home injured more often than not." She paused, swallowing against the old grief. "I learned because I had to." "You said was," Cole noted quietly. "I'm sorry for your loss." "It was 3 years ago," Eleanor said, though time had not dulled the ache as much as she had hoped. "Comanche raid. He died defending a family's homestead while I waited for him to come home." Cole was silent for a long moment, his hand still stroking Blue's head. "The frontier takes too many good people," he finally said, "but it seems to spare some of the bad ones just fine." Eleanor could not argue with that observation. She had seen enough of the world's injustices to know he spoke truth. "Will you take him with you now?" she asked, though part of her was reluctant to see the dog go. Caring for Blue had given her something to focus on beyond her own uncertain future. "I would like to," Cole admitted, "but he is in no shape to travel on horseback, and I have got a herd 30 miles from here that I need to get back to. My boss gave me 2 days to find Blue, and I have used most of that already." He looked at her with something like hope in his eyes. "Would you be willing to continue caring for him? I can pay you, not much, but whatever you think is fair, and I will come back for him as soon as I can get away again." Eleanor considered the request. She had been planning to move on from Abilene to continue west to Colorado, where she had heard there were opportunities for women willing to work hard, but she had no specific timeline, And the truth was that she had been reluctant to leave the relative safety of the established trail town for the uncertainty of the mountain territories. "I will need supplies," she said finally. "Clean bandages, medicine if you can get it, and food for both of us. He needs to eat regularly to regain his strength." "Done," Cole said immediately. "I passed a general store in town that was just opening when I rode through. I will get whatever you need and bring it back before I have to leave." He was as good as his word. Within 2 hours, he returned with a canvas sack filled with supplies, far more than Eleanor had expected. There were rolls of clean cotton for bandages, a bottle of carbolic acid for disinfecting wounds, tins of beans and peaches, salt pork, coffee, and even a small bag of peppermint candies that made her eyes sting with unexpected emotion. She could not remember the last time someone had thought to bring her something purely for pleasure. "This is too much," she protested, but Cole shook his head. "It is not nearly enough for what you have already done," he said firmly. "Blue is family to me. My parents died when I was 16, and I have been on my own ever since. That dog has been the one constant in my life through all the changes and hardships." He pulled a worn leather pouch from his pocket and counted out $20 in coins and crumpled bills. "This should cover your time and effort. I will be back in 2 weeks, maybe sooner, if I can manage it." Eleanor wanted to refuse the money. It felt wrong somehow to accept payment for something she would have done anyway out of simple compassion. But she also knew that pride was a luxury she could not afford. The money would allow her to stay in Abilene longer, to rest and plan her next move rather than rushing westward out of desperation. "I will take good care of him," she promised, tucking the money into the small purse she kept hidden in her bodice. "You have my word on that." Cole knelt beside Blue one more time, pressing his forehead against the dog's graying muzzle. "You be good for the lady," he murmured. "I will be back soon, old friend. You just focus on getting better." Blue whined softly, and Eleanor had to look away from the obvious affection between man and animal. It reminded her too much of what she had lost, the simple intimacy of loving and being loved in return. When Cole stood, he met her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Thank you," he said simply. "I do not even know your name, and you have given me back something I thought was gone forever." "Eleanor Brennan," she told him, "and you are welcome, Mr. Maddox." "Cole," he corrected, with a slight smile that transformed his weathered face. "Just Cole." She watched him ride away, his horse kicking up dust as he urged it into a ground-eating lope. Then she turned back to Blue, who was watching her with those knowing brown eyes. "Well," she said, settling down beside him, "it looks like it is just you and me for a while." The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Eleanor tended to Blue with the same careful attention she had given from the start, changing his bandages twice daily, keeping the wound clean, and ensuring he drank plenty of water. She coaxed him to eat even when he seemed disinclined, sitting beside him and hand-feeding him pieces of meat until his appetite returned in full. Gradually, she saw improvement. The swelling in his leg decreased, and he began to put weight on it when she helped him stand. The wound on his shoulder scabbed over cleanly with no signs of infection, and his coat started to look less dull as she brushed it regularly. But Blue was not the only one who benefited from their time together. Eleanor found that caring for the dog gave her days purpose and structure. She woke each morning with tasks to accomplish, and she went to sleep each night with the satisfaction of knowing she had done something worthwhile. The other travelers in the camp noticed her dedication, and several women stopped by to chat, bringing small offerings of food or supplies. She learned their stories and shared bits of her own, forming tentative connections that eased the loneliness she had carried for so long. One of these women, a weathered homesteader named Martha Gaines, who was passing through on her way back to her farm after visiting her married daughter, took particular interest in Eleanor's situation. "You are good with animals," Martha observed one afternoon, watching as Eleanor coaxed Blue into taking a few careful steps. "And with people, too, from what I've seen. Have you thought about staying in Abilene? The town is growing fast with the cattle trade, and there is always need for folks with healing skills." Eleanor had not considered it, but the suggestion took root in her mind. She had been so focused on running towards something new that she had not stopped to think about whether that was what she truly needed. Perhaps what she required was not a fresh start in an unknown place, but rather the chance to build something stable right where she was. "I would not know where to begin," she admitted. "I have a little money now, but not enough to set up any kind of business." Martha waved a dismissive hand. "You start small, girl. Let people know you are willing to tend injuries and ailments. Word spreads fast in a place like this. Before you know it, you will have more work than you can handle." The idea stayed with Eleanor over the following days, growing stronger each time she considered it. She had skills that were valuable, and she had proven to herself that she could survive on her own. Why not stop running and start building instead? Blue continued to improve, and by the end of the first week he was walking on his own, though he still favored the injured leg. Eleanor started taking him on short walks around the camp, letting him sniff at interesting scents and gradually rebuild his strength. He seemed content in her care, always staying close and watching her with devoted attention. She talked to him constantly, sharing her thoughts and worries as though he could understand every word. Perhaps he could in his own way. She had heard that dogs were good at reading human emotion, and Blue certainly seemed attuned to her moods. It was during one of these walks, 10 days after Cole had left, that Eleanor saw the riders approaching. There were 5 of them, moving in a loose formation that suggested they were not together by chance. They wore rough clothing and had an air about them that made the hair on the back of Eleanor's neck stand up in warning. Blue growled low in his throat, pressing against her leg, and she trusted his instinct enough to turn back toward the camp. She'd almost reached her wagon when one of the riders broke away from the group and trotted over to intercept her. He was young, probably not more than 25, with a cruel mouth and eyes that looked her over in a way that made her skin crawl. "That is a fine dog you have there," he said, his voice carrying a mocking edge. "Looks familiar, too. Where did you get him?" Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. "I found him injured and have been caring for him. His owner will be back for him soon." The rider's smile widened, showing yellowed teeth. "Is that so? Well, maybe his owner will not be coming back at all. Maybe we ought to just take the dog now and save everyone some trouble." "You will do no such thing," Eleanor said, her hand moving toward the pocket where she kept a small knife. It would be useless against 5 armed men, but she refused to show fear. The rider leaned forward in his saddle, his expression darkening. "You have got some nerve, lady. Do you know who I am?" "I do not care who you are," Eleanor shot back. "You will not touch this dog." For a moment she thought he would push the issue, but then one of his companions called out to him, "Leave it, Pike. We have got business to attend to. A dog is not worth our time." Pike glared at Eleanor for a long moment before finally nodding. "You are lucky," he told her, "but you might want to warn that owner of yours if he does show up that we do not forget slights. Blue here cost us a good haul, and debts have a way of coming due." He wheeled his horse around and rejoined his group, and Eleanor watched them ride toward Abilene proper, her hands shaking with delayed reaction. So these were the rustlers Cole had mentioned, the ones who had shot Blue. And from the sound of it, they held a grudge against both the dog and his master. She hurried back to her wagon and spent the rest of the day in a state of anxious vigilance, jumping at every sound. Blue seemed to pick up on her nervousness, staying close and alert. When darkness fell, Eleanor loaded the old pistol and kept it within easy reach, determined to be ready if the rustlers returned. But the night passed without incident, and the next day brought no sign of the threatening men. Eleanor began to relax slightly, though she remained cautious. She asked around the camp and learned that the men were part of a gang that operated in the area, stealing cattle and causing trouble wherever they went. Most people gave them a wide berth, and the local law seemed either unable or unwilling to do much about them. The knowledge sat uneasily in Eleanor's stomach. Cole would be coming back soon, and when he did, he might be riding straight into danger. She had no way to warn him, No way to send a message that would reach him before he arrived. All she could do was wait and hope that he would be careful. Cole returned on the 13th day, riding into camp just after noon with dust on his clothes and exhaustion in his eyes. But when he saw Blue walking toward him on 4 steady legs, his entire face transformed with joy. He dropped from his saddle and went to his knees, and the dog bounded the last few steps to meet him, tail wagging so hard his entire back end wiggled. "Look at you," Cole breathed, his hands running over Blue's body, checking the healed wound and testing the strength of the once injured leg. "I cannot believe it. You worked a miracle," he said, looking up at Eleanor with an expression of such gratitude that she felt her cheeks flush. "It was not a miracle," she said, trying to deflect the intensity of his gaze, "just time and proper care." Cole stood, and before Eleanor could react, he had closed the distance between them and taken both her hands in his. "It was a miracle to me," he said firmly. "I came back expecting to collect a dog who could barely walk and would need months more to recover. Instead, I find him nearly back to his old self. You have done more than I had any right to ask." His hands were warm and calloused, his grip gentle despite the obvious strength in his fingers. Eleanor felt something flutter in her chest, something she had not felt in the 3 years since her husband died. She withdrew her hands carefully, unsettled by her own reaction. "I am glad I could help," she said, forcing her voice to remain neutral. "He is a good dog, and he clearly loves you very much." Cole's expression softened. "The feeling is mutual. I meant what I said before. That dog and I both owe you everything." He reached for the leather pouch at his belt. "Let me pay you more. What you have done is worth far more than what I gave you before." Eleanor shook her head quickly. "No, you paid me fairly. I will not take more." "Then let me buy you dinner at least," Cole pressed. "There is a decent restaurant in town, and I would like to hear how Blue did over the past 2 weeks. You can tell me everything while we eat." Eleanor knew she should refuse. Getting involved with this man beyond the simple transaction of caring for his dog was unwise. She had seen the way Pike and his gang looked when they mentioned Blue, and she understood that Cole was likely a target for their anger. The smart thing would be to say goodbye, take her payment, and move on with her life. But she found herself nodding instead. "Dinner would be nice," she heard herself say. "Thank you." Cole's smile was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. "Give me an hour to get cleaned up and settle my horse at the livery. I will come back for you then." True to his word, he returned 60 minutes later, transformed by a shave and clean clothes. He had even made an effort to tame his dark hair, though it still curled rebelliously at his collar. He offered Eleanor his arm with courtly politeness, and she took it, acutely aware of the solid strength beneath the fabric of his shirt. They walked into Abilene together, Blue trotting alongside them with obvious happiness at having his person back. The restaurant Cole chose was modest but clean, and the proprietor greeted them with genuine warmth. They settled at a table near the window, and Cole ordered beefsteaks and potatoes for both of them, along with coffee that came strong and hot. "Tell me everything," Cole urged once their food arrived. "How did he do? Was he difficult to manage? Did the wound heal cleanly?" Eleanor recounted the past 2 weeks in detail, describing Blue's gradual recovery and the routine she had established for his care. Cole listened with complete attention, asking occasional questions and shaking his head in amazement at some of her methods. "My mother would have liked you," he said at one point. "She had that same instinct for healing. She could look at a person or animal and just know what they needed." "What happened to her?" Eleanor asked gently. "You said your parents died when you were 16. Cole's expression clouded. "Cholera. There was an outbreak that swept through our town in Missouri. They both got sick within days of each other and were gone inside a week. I was healthy as a horse, never caught it at all, but I would have traded places with either of them if I could have." He took a long drink of his coffee. "After they died, there was nothing keeping me there. I sold our small farm, packed what I could carry, and headed west. I have been working cattle ever since." "That is where you got Blue," Eleanor guessed. "From a ranch in Texas," Cole confirmed. The owner's hound had a litter, and he gave me pick of the puppies as part of my wages. Blue was the runt, smallest of the bunch, but he had spirit. He has been with me through 4 different jobs, 3 winters that nearly killed us both, and more close calls than I can count. He reached down to scratch behind the dog's ears. I cannot imagine my life without him. Eleanor understood that kind of attachment. She had felt it for her husband, and she still felt it for her brothers back in Missouri, though she had not seen them in years. Family is precious, she said quietly, especially out here where everything is so uncertain. Do you have family waiting for you somewhere, Cole asked. You mentioned brothers. 5 of them, all back in Missouri with families of their own now. They wanted me to stay after my husband died, but I could not bear it. Everywhere I looked reminded me of what I had lost. Eleanor stirred her coffee absently. I thought if I went somewhere new, somewhere with no memories, it would be easier, but I learned that grief travels with you no matter how far you go. That it does, Cole agreed, but maybe that is not such a bad thing. Those we have lost deserve to be remembered, to still be part of our lives even though they're gone. They fell into comfortable silence, and Eleanor realized with some surprise that she was enjoying herself. Cole was easy to talk to, his manner straightforward and honest. He did not try to impress her with exaggerated stories or false bravado, and he listened when she spoke as though her words mattered. It was when they were finishing their meal that Eleanor remembered the encounter with Pike and his gang. She set down her fork and looked at Cole seriously. There is something you should know, she said. Some men came to the camp about 3 days ago. One of them recognized Blue and made threats. He said the dog had cost them a good haul and that they do not forget slights. Cole's expression hardened. What did he look like? Eleanor described Pike as best she could, and she saw recognition flash in Cole's eyes. That is him, Cole said grimly. The rustler who shot Blue. His name is Pike Jennings, and he runs with a gang of about 10 men. They have been plaguing ranches in this area for the past year, stealing cattle and shooting anyone who tries to stop them. He seemed very interested in the dog, Eleanor said, and in you. I think he might come looking for trouble when he realizes you're back. Cole was quiet for a moment, his jaw tight. Then he sighed and met her eyes. I appreciate the warning, but you do not need to worry about me. I can handle Pike Jennings if he comes around. Can you handle 10 men? Eleanor challenged, because he will not come alone if he decides to settle his grudge. I have dealt with worse odds be, Cole said, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes that might have been uncertainty. I will be careful, I promise. Eleanor wanted to argue further, but she knew it would do no good. Men like Cole had their pride, and they would face danger head-on rather than run from it. She could only hope that his confidence was not misplaced. They left the restaurant as the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Cole walked Eleanor back to the camp slowly, as though reluctant for the evening to end. Blue padded between them, occasionally bumping against their legs in contentment. I have to rejoin the herd tomorrow, Cole said as they neared Eleanor's wagon. We are driving them north to one of the rail shipping points, and I cannot afford to miss more work. But I was wondering if you might still be here when I get back. It should only be another week or so. Eleanor hesitated. She had been planning to move on, to continue her journey west. But Martha's suggestion about staying in Abilene had taken root, and she found herself reluctant to leave now. And if she was honest with herself, Cole's presence had something to do with that reluctance. I might be, she said carefully. I have been thinking about settling here for a while, seeing if I can establish myself with the healing skills I have. Cole's face lit up. That would be wonderful. Abilene needs someone like you, and I would rest easier knowing you were not traveling alone through dangerous territory. He paused, then added with a slight smile, and I would be glad to see you again when I return, if you would like that. Eleanor felt her heart skip. I would like that, she admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. They stood facing each other in the growing darkness, and Eleanor became aware of how close they were standing, close enough that she could see the darker flecks in Cole's eyes and smell the faint scent of soap and leather that clung to him. For a moment she thought he might lean in to kiss her, and she was not entirely sure what she would do if he did. But Cole was clearly more gentlemanly than that. He took a careful step back and tipped his hat to her. "Good night, Eleanor. Thank you again for everything you have done. I mean that with all my heart." "Good night, Cole," she replied, her voice softer than she intended. "Be safe out there." She watched him walk away into the gathering night, Blue trotting faithfully at his side. Only when they disappeared from view did she realize she was smiling, something warm and hopeful unfurling in her chest. The next morning, Eleanor made inquiries in town about renting a small building or room where she could set up a space for tending to the sick and injured. She found a widow woman named Agnes Porter who owned a boarding house and was willing to rent Eleanor a ground floor room with a separate entrance for a reasonable monthly fee. The room was small but clean, with good light from a large window and enough space for a bed, a table, and storage for supplies. Eleanor moved her belongings from the wagon to the room that same day, feeling a sense of relief at having walls and a roof over her head again. She used some of the money Cole had given her to purchase additional medical supplies and then began spreading word that she was available to treat injuries and illnesses. The work came slowly at first: a woman with a sprained wrist, a child with a fever, a man who had gashed his hand on a broken bottle. But Eleanor treated each patient with the same careful attention she had given Blue, and word of her skill began to spread. Within 2 weeks, she was seeing several patients a day, and the small room had become a gathering place where people came not just for healing but for comfort and advice. Agnes proved to be good company, often stopping by with tea and conversation in the evenings. She was a practical woman who had lost her husband to a horse accident 5 years earlier and had supported herself ever since by running the boarding house. She took an almost maternal interest in Eleanor, offering guidance on dealing with difficult patients and sharing gossip about the town's residents. "That cowboy who comes around asking about you," Agnes said one evening as they sat together after Eleanor's last patient had left. "Cole Maddox. What is the story there?" Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. Cole had returned from his cattle drive 4 days earlier and had been stopping by nearly every evening, always with some excuse. He needed advice about Blue's diet, or he wanted to know if she had treated any interesting cases, or he had brought her a book he thought she might enjoy. Eleanor saw through the pretenses, and she suspected Agnes did too. "There is no story," Eleanor said. But even she could hear the lack of conviction in her voice. "He is grateful that I helped his dog, that is all." Agnes made a skeptical sound. "I have seen the way that man looks at you, girl. That is not gratitude. That is interest, pure and simple." "Even if it is," Eleanor protested, "and I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of attention. My husband has only been gone 3 years. 3 years is long enough to mourn," Agnes said firmly but not unkindly. "Your husband would not want you to spend the rest of your life alone. And from what you have told me about him, he was a good man who would want you to be happy." Eleanor knew Agnes was right. Her husband had been generous and loving, and he would have hated the thought of her denying herself happiness out of misplaced loyalty to his memory. But moving forward felt like a betrayal somehow, as though allowing herself to feel something for Cole meant forgetting what she had shared with her first love. "I do not know what I feel," she admitted. "Cole is a good man, and I enjoy his company. But I'm afraid to want more than that. What if I open my heart again and lose him too? This life is so uncertain, so dangerous. I do not know if I can survive that kind of loss twice." Agnes reached over and patted her hand. "You can, because you are stronger than you think. But I understand your fear. Loving someone is always a risk, especially out here. All I'm saying is, do not close yourself off from the possibility just because you are scared. Sometimes the greatest courage is letting yourself be vulnerable." That conversation stayed with Eleanor over the following days. She found herself thinking about Cole at odd moments, remembering the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness of his hands when he touched Blue, the earnestness in his voice when he thanked her for saving his dog. She caught herself looking forward to his visits, dressing with more care on days when she thought he might stop by, feeling disappointed when evening came and he had not appeared. It was during one of Cole's visits, nearly a month after they had first met, that everything changed. He arrived earlier than usual, just as Eleanor was finishing with a patient who had come in with a badly bruised foot. She walked the man out and found Cole waiting on the wooden step outside her door, hat in hands, looking unusually nervous. "Is something wrong?" Eleanor asked immediately, thinking of Blue. "Is the dog all right?" "Blue is fine," Cole assured her quickly. "I just wanted to talk to you about something, and I thought I should do it properly rather than continuing to make excuses to see you." Eleanor's heart began to beat faster. "All right, come inside." They settled at her small table, and Cole turned his hat in his hands, clearly struggling with how to begin. Eleanor waited patiently, though every nerve in her body felt alive with anticipation. "I have been thinking a lot these past weeks," Cole finally said, "about my life and what I want from it. I've spent the last 10 years drifting from job to job, never putting down roots, never letting myself want more than the next meal and a dry place to sleep. It seemed easier that way after my parents died. Safer." He paused and met her eyes, and Eleanor saw vulnerability there that made her breath catch. "But then I met you," Cole continued, "and for the first time in a decade, I find myself wanting things I thought I had given up on: a home, a future, someone to build that future with." He reached across the table and took her hand carefully, as though afraid she might pull away. "I know it has not been long, and I know you have your own grief to carry, but I would like the chance to court you properly, Eleanor, to see if what I feel might be something you could feel too, given time." Eleanor looked down at their joined hands, her mind racing. This was what she had been both hoping for and dreading, the moment when she had to decide whether to risk her heart again. She thought about Agnes's words, about courage and vulnerability. She thought about the emptiness of the past 3 years and the warmth she felt whenever Cole was near. "I am afraid," she admitted in a whisper. "I have lost so much already. I do not know if I can bear to lose again." Cole's grip on her hand tightened. "I am afraid too," he said. "I am afraid that I will somehow fail you, that I will not be enough. But I think being afraid together might be better than being safe and alone. At least I would like to try." Eleanor lifted her eyes to his and saw in them the same longing and hope she felt in her own heart. The decision crystallized in that moment, clear and certain despite her fears. "Yes," she said simply, "yes, I would like that too." The smile that spread across Cole's face was radiant, transforming him from weathered cowboy to something boyish and joyful. He brought her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, the gesture so tender that Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes. "You will not regret this," he promised. "I swear it." "I believe you," Eleanor said, and she realized with some surprise that she meant it. From that day forward, Cole became a constant presence in Eleanor's life. He courted her with an old-fashioned propriety that she found endearing, bringing her small gifts and calling on her each evening when his work was done. They took walks through Abilene's growing streets with Blue ambling beside them, and they talked for hours about everything and nothing. Cole told her about his years working cattle, the places he had been and things he had seen. Eleanor shared stories of her childhood in Missouri and her brief marriage, finding that she could speak of her husband now without the sharp edge of grief that had once made his memory unbearable. The people of Abilene quickly accepted them as a couple. Agnes beamed with satisfaction at having predicted the romance, and several of Eleanor's patients made pointed comments about what a fine match they made. Even the town's more conservative residents seemed to approve, perhaps because both Cole and Eleanor conducted themselves with perfect respectability. But their happiness was not to go unchallenged. Pike Jennings had not forgotten his grudge, and he had been waiting for his opportunity. It came on a warm evening in early September, 6 weeks after Cole and Eleanor had begun courting. Cole had just walked Eleanor home from a church social, and they were standing outside her door, reluctant to part as always. Blue had wandered a short distance away, investigating an interesting scent near the corner of the building. The shot came without warning, splitting the quiet evening with its sharp crack. Cole reacted instantly, pushing Eleanor behind him and drawing his gun in one smooth motion. Blue yelped and came running back, and Eleanor saw with horror that blood was streaming from a graze along the dog's side. "Come out where I can see you," Cole called, his voice deadly calm. "Or are you too much of a coward to face me directly, Jennings?" Pike emerged from the shadows across the street, gun in hand, a mean smile on his face. "I am right here, Maddox, and I have been waiting for this moment since you cost me and my boys 100 head of prime cattle." "You mean since I stopped you from stealing cattle that did not belong to you," Cole corrected coldly. "There is a difference." "Not to me," Pike said. "You are going to pay for that interference, and your dog is just the start." Eleanor's hands were shaking, but she forced herself to stay calm. She could see other men emerging from the shadows around Pike, at least 4 of them, all armed. Cole was outnumbered and outgunned, and if she did not do something, he was going to die. "There are witnesses," she called out, her voice carrying in the still air. "People who have seen what is happening. If you kill him, you will hang." Pike's attention shifted to her, his expression turning ugly. "Maybe you should have kept your nose out of this, lady. Maybe you should have let that dog die when you had the chance." "She saved Blue's life," Cole said, and there was something fierce and protective in his voice that made Eleanor's heart swell. "And if you so much as look at her wrong, I will put a bullet between your eyes before your friends can finish drawing their weapons." The standoff stretched taut, both sides waiting for someone to make the first move. Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, could feel the tension coiling through Cole's body where he stood shielding her. It was Agnes who broke the deadlock, stepping out onto the boarding house porch with a shotgun cradled casually in her arms. "I do not think much of men who threaten women and shoot at dogs," she announced conversationally, "and I think even less of men who stack the odds in their own favor. Seems to me this is not a fair fight." Several other residents began emerging from nearby buildings, clearly drawn by the gunshot. Some were armed, others merely curious, but their presence was enough to shift the balance. Pike looked around and seemed to realize that his advantage was slipping away. "This is not over," he snarled at Cole. "Watch your back, Maddox. One day you will not have a woman and an old lady to hide behind." "I am not hiding," Cole said quietly. "And any time you want to settle this fair and square, you know where to find me." Pike spat in the dust and jerked his head at his men. They retreated into the darkness, and Eleanor sagged with relief. Cole holstered his gun and turned to her, his hands gripping her shoulders as he looked her over anxiously. "Are you hurt? Did he touch you?" "I am fine," Eleanor managed, though her legs felt weak. "But Blue is bleeding. We need to tend to him." The wound was superficial, just a graze that had torn through the skin without doing serious damage. Eleanor cleaned and bandaged it with practiced efficiency while Cole held the dog steady, murmuring reassurances. When she finished, she sat back and let out a shaky breath. "That was too close," she whispered. Cole pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. "I am sorry," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I never meant to put you in danger. Maybe I should stay away for a while until Pike forgets about his grudge." Eleanor pulled back far enough to look at him, seeing the genuine distress in his eyes. "No," she said firmly. "I will not let him dictate my life or yours. We face this together, or not at all." "Together," Cole repeated, and he smiled despite the tension of the past few minutes. "I am starting to really like the sound of that word." The confrontation with Pike cast a shadow over the following days, but it also served to crystallize something for both Eleanor and Cole. They had faced danger together and come through it united, and that shared experience bonded them in a way that weeks of gentle courtship had not. Cole began spending more time in town, taking odd jobs that allowed him to stay close to Eleanor. He repaired fences, helped with construction projects, and occasionally hired on for short cattle drives that lasted only a few days. The work paid less than his previous position, but it kept him near Eleanor, and that was worth more to him than any wage. Eleanor's practice continued to grow, and she found herself treating a wider variety of ailments and injuries. She delivered her first baby in October, a difficult birth that lasted through the night and into the following morning. When the healthy infant finally emerged and let out its first lusty cry, Eleanor felt a fierce satisfaction that rivaled anything she had ever experienced. The grateful mother named the baby girl Eleanor in her honor, and the gesture moved Eleanor to tears. As autumn deepened and the first cold winds began to blow across the prairie, Cole and Eleanor's relationship deepened as well. They had progressed from chaste kisses stolen on her doorstep to longer embraces that left them both breathless and wanting more. But Cole was always careful to respect Eleanor's boundaries, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. It was in late October that Cole asked the question Eleanor had been both anticipating and dreading. They were sitting together in her small room, Blue stretched out at their feet, watching the first snowflakes of the season drift past the window. "Marry me," Cole said, turning to face her. "I know it has not been long, but I'm sure of what I feel. I love you, Eleanor, and I want to spend my life with you. I want to build a home with you, raise children with you, grow old beside you." He took both her hands in his. "Please say you will be my wife." Eleanor felt tears slide down her cheeks, but they were not tears of sadness. "Yes," she whispered, "yes, I will marry you." Cole's whoop of joy was loud enough to bring Agnes running, and when she saw them embracing, she let out her own delighted laugh. "About time," she declared. "I was beginning to think you two would dance around each other forever." They were married 3 weeks later in Abilene's small church, with Agnes and several of Eleanor's patients as witnesses. Eleanor wore a simple dress of cream-colored wool that Agnes helped her sew, and Cole stood at the altar in his best clothes, his face shining with happiness. Blue attended as well, sitting patiently through the ceremony as though he understood the importance of the occasion. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Cole kissed Eleanor with a tenderness that promised a lifetime of devotion. They held a small celebration afterward at the boarding house, and their friends toasted their happiness with cheap whiskey and genuine affection. Cole had managed to save enough money to rent a small house on the edge of town, a modest 2-room structure with a fireplace and a tiny kitchen. It was not much, but it was theirs, and Eleanor felt her heart swell as Cole carried her over the threshold on their wedding night. What followed was tender and passionate, a slow exploration of each other that left them both breathless and satiated. Eleanor had not realized how much she had missed the physical intimacy of marriage, the simple pleasure of falling asleep in her husband's arms and waking to his kiss. Cole was attentive and gentle, always ensuring her pleasure before seeking his own, and Eleanor felt the last walls around her heart crumble in the face of his devotion. The winter that followed was cold but happy. Eleanor continued her healing practice, now working from the larger space of their home where she could see patients in one room while maintaining their living quarters in the other. Cole found steady work at a nearby ranch, hired on as a hand with the promise of better positions as he proved himself. Blue adapted to domestic life with ease, content to spend his days lounging by the fire and his evenings accompanying Cole home from work. Pike Jennings and his gang remained a distant threat, occasionally spotted in the area but never again directly confronting Cole or Eleanor. The local law had been cracking down on rustling operations, and several gang members had been arrested or driven out of the territory. Pike himself had grown more cautious, and while Cole never let his guard down completely, the immediate danger seemed to have passed. Spring came early to Kansas in 1873, and with it came new life in multiple forms. Eleanor discovered she was pregnant in March, the realization hitting her one morning when she woke up feeling queasy and could not face the smell of coffee. Cole's joy when she told him was almost comical in its intensity. He hovered over her anxiously, trying to prevent her from doing any work that he deemed too strenuous, until Eleanor finally had to sit him down and explain that pregnancy was not an illness. "I am going to be a father," Cole said wonderingly, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "I never thought I would have this, Eleanor, a wife, a child, a real home. You have given me everything I thought was lost to me forever." "You have given me the same," Eleanor said, covering his hand with hers. "I thought my life was over when my first husband died. I thought I would spend my remaining years alone, just going through the motions of living. But you showed me that it is possible to love again, to build something new from the ashes of what was lost." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and summer. Eleanor continued to work. Though she reduced her hours as she grew larger and more ungainly, Cole became even more protective, and Blue seemed to understand that something important was happening, staying close to Eleanor and resting his graying muzzle on her lap whenever she sat down. It was in early October, as the leaves were turning gold and the air carried the first hint of autumn chill, that Eleanor went into labor. The process was long and difficult, lasting through the night and well into the next day. Agnes attended her, along with another woman from town who had experience with difficult births. Cole was banished to the other room, where he paced anxiously and tried not to panic at every sound. When the baby finally emerged with a powerful cry that shook the small house, Cole burst through the door despite orders to stay out. He froze when he saw Eleanor, pale and exhausted but smiling, holding a squirming bundle against her chest. "A son," Agnes announced with satisfaction. "Healthy and strong, with a pair of lungs on him that will ensure you never sleep through the night again." Cole approached the bed slowly, as though afraid he might break the spell. When Eleanor pulled back the blanket to show him their son's red, wrinkled face, he let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "He is perfect," Cole breathed, reaching out with one finger to stroke the baby's cheek. "You are perfect. Both of you." They named the boy James after Cole's father, and from the moment of his birth he became the center of their world. Cole proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night to help with feedings, changing soiled cloths without complaint, and spending hours simply holding the baby and marveling at the tiny miracle they had created. Blue, too, took to the new addition with surprising grace. The old hound appointed himself James's guardian, lying beside the cradle and growling softly if anyone approached too quickly. Eleanor often found Cole and Blue both watching over the sleeping baby, man and dog united in their protective vigil. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. Cole advanced in his position at the ranch, eventually becoming foreman with increased responsibilities and better pay. Eleanor's practice flourished, and she became known throughout the region as a skilled healer. They added 2 more rooms onto their house as their family grew, welcoming a daughter named Sarah in 1875 and another son, Thomas, in 1877. Blue lived to the remarkable age of 17, finally passing peacefully in his sleep one winter night in 1876. Cole grieved deeply for his old friend, and they buried the hound beneath a cottonwood tree on their property, marking the spot with a simple wooden cross. Eleanor held her husband as he wept, understanding that Blue's death marked the end of a chapter in Cole's life, the final link to the wandering cowboy he had been before they met. "He lived a good life," Eleanor said softly as they stood over the grave, "and he got to spend his final years surrounded by love and comfort, which is more than many creatures can claim." "It is because of you," Cole said, pulling her close. "If you had not found him that day, if you had not cared enough to nurse him back to health, I would have lost him years ago. Every day I had with Blue after that was a gift you gave me." The children grew strong and healthy, each developing their own distinct personality. James was serious and thoughtful, with his father's quiet strength. Sarah was bright and curious, always asking questions and exploring everything she could reach. Thomas was the wild one, fearless and energetic, constantly getting into scrapes that required his mother's healing skills. Cole proved to be the kind of father Eleanor had always hoped for her children. He was patient and kind, teaching them to ride and rope, sharing stories of his years working cattle, and instilling in them the values of honesty and hard work. But he was also playful, engaging in games and laughter, and he made sure they understood that they were loved unconditionally. Eleanor, for her part, found a balance between her healing work and motherhood that satisfied both parts of her nature. She taught her children about medicine and herbs, involving them in her practice as they grew old enough to help. Sarah showed particular aptitude, and Eleanor began to think that perhaps her daughter might follow in her footsteps. The threat of Pike Jennings finally ended in 1878, when the outlaw was killed during a botched bank robbery in a neighboring county. News of his death brought Cole a sense of closure he had not realized he needed. The shadow that had hung over them for years lifted, and Cole felt as though he could finally breathe freely. As the decade turned and the 1880s began, the Maddox family found themselves firmly established as respected members of Abilene's growing community. Cole had saved enough money to purchase a small ranch of his own, fulfilling a dream he had harbored since his parents died. The spread was modest, just a few hundred acres with a creek running through it, but it was theirs, and they worked it together as a family. Eleanor reduced her healing practice to only the most urgent cases, focusing instead on teaching Sarah everything she knew. The girl was 16 now, poised and competent, with her mother's instinct for healing and her father's steady nerve. Eleanor watched with pride as Sarah treated her first solo patient, a ranch hand with a dislocated shoulder, handling the situation with confidence and skill. James, at 21, had become Cole's right hand in managing the ranch. He had his father's way with animals and an eye for good horse flesh that promised success in the cattle business. Thomas, at 17, was still finding his way, torn between staying on the ranch and seeking adventure in the wider world. Eleanor tried not to worry about him too much, knowing that young men needed to find their own paths. It was during a quiet evening in the spring of 1885, as Eleanor and Cole sat on the porch of their ranch house watching the sun set over their land, that Cole brought up something that had been on his mind. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Staying in Abilene instead of continuing west? You had plans once, dreams of Colorado and new horizons." Eleanor thought about the question seriously before answering. "No," she said finally. "I thought I needed to run away from my grief, to find somewhere with no memories, but what I really needed was to find someone who could help me make new memories, better ones. You gave me that, Cole. You and the children and this life we built together." "That dog and I both owe you everything," Cole said, echoing the words he had spoken so many years ago. "I meant it then, and I mean it even more now." "You did not just save Blue's life that day, Eleanor. You saved mine too. I was drifting, lost, not really living, but you gave me a reason to put down roots, to build something that would last. You gave me a family and a home and a purpose beyond just surviving from one day to the next." Eleanor reached over and took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "We saved each other," she said simply. "That is what love does. It takes two broken people and makes them whole." They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Two people who had found their way to each other through chance and choice, through hardship and healing. The ranch was quiet around them, the children all settled for the evening, the cattle secure in their pastures. It was a peaceful, ordinary moment, and Eleanor treasured it all the more for that simplicity. The years continued to roll by, bringing the changes that time always brings. James married a young woman from town in 1886 and brought her home to the ranch, where she quickly became a beloved part of the family. They gave Cole and Eleanor their first grandchild in 1887, a healthy boy named Cole Jr., and Eleanor felt her heart expand with the joy of holding her son's son. Sarah delayed marriage to focus on her healing practice, which had grown to serve not just Abilene, but the surrounding ranches and homesteads. She became even more skilled than her mother, her reputation spreading throughout the region. When she finally did marry in 1889, it was to a doctor from back east who had come west to establish a practice. Together they built a small hospital in Abilene, the first real medical facility the town had ever had. Thomas did eventually leave to seek his fortune, traveling to Montana where he worked on the great cattle ranches of that territory, but he came home often, and he always brought stories of his adventures that kept the family entertained for hours. Eventually, he too settled down, returning to Kansas with a wife and 2 daughters of his own. Cole and Eleanor aged together gracefully, their hair turning gray and their bodies slowing, but their love never diminishing. They remained each other's closest confidant and greatest supporter, facing the challenges of their later years with the same partnership that had seen them through their earlier trials. It was in the summer of 1895, on the anniversary of the day Eleanor had first found Blue beneath that cottonwood tree 23 years earlier, that Cole and Eleanor took a ride out to the old campsite. The area had changed dramatically, with Abilene's growth spreading outward, but the tree itself still stood weathered but enduring. "I cannot believe it has been so long," Eleanor said, dismounting and walking over to touch the rough bark. "It feels like yesterday in some ways, and a lifetime ago in others." Cole joined her, wrapping his arm around her waist. "Best day of my life," he said. "The day I found Blue alive, and found you. If that rustler had not shot my dog, if Blue had not wandered to where you would find him, if you had not had the skills and compassion to save him, none of this would have happened. Our entire life together grew from that one moment of chance and kindness." "Providence," Eleanor corrected gently. "I do not think it was chance at all. I think we were meant to find each other, and Blue was the bridge that connected us." Cole kissed the top of her head, and they stood together beneath the old tree, remembering. They thought about that first meeting, Eleanor young and uncertain, Cole desperate and grateful. They thought about their courtship, the danger from Pike Jennings, their wedding, the births of their children. They thought about all the ordinary days in between, the laughter and tears, the struggles and triumphs, the slow building of a life that neither of them had thought possible. "I love you," Cole said, the words as heartfelt as the first time he had spoken them. "I will love you until my last breath, and beyond that, if such things are possible." "I love you too," Eleanor replied, leaning into his solid warmth. "Thank you for teaching me that it is possible to love again after loss, that opening your heart a second time does not diminish what came before. You honored my first marriage by showing me that I deserved a second chance at happiness." They rode back to the ranch as the sun set. 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful and lasting from the foundation of compassion and courage. Their grandchildren were waiting when they arrived, spilling out of the house with shouts of welcome, and Cole and Eleanor dismounted into the warm chaos of family. The evening was filled with laughter and stories. Multiple generations gathered around the dinner table that Cole had built with his own hands decades earlier. Eleanor looked around at the faces of her children and grandchildren, at the home she and Cole had created together, and felt a profound sense of gratitude for every twist of fate that had led her to this moment. Sarah's husband was telling a story about a difficult surgery he had performed, and James was interjecting with comments about a similar situation with a breech birth in one of the cattle. Thomas's daughters were pestering their father for stories about Montana, while Cole Jr. toddled around the table getting into everything. The noise was considerable, the confusion considerable, and Eleanor would not have changed a single thing. That night, after everyone had gone to bed and the house was finally quiet, Eleanor and Cole lay together in the darkness of their bedroom. They had shared this bed for over 20 years now, and it had become as familiar as their own heartbeats. Cole's arm was around her, her head resting on his shoulder, their bodies fitted together with the ease of long practice. "Do you ever think about what you would tell your younger self?" Eleanor asked softly. "If you could go back to that day when Blue disappeared, knowing everything that was coming?" Cole considered the question. "I would tell myself to trust," he said finally. "To trust that even when things seem darkest, there is light ahead, that the people who seem to be strangers might become the most important people in your life, that taking a chance on love is always worth the risk." He tightened his arm around her. "What would you tell yourself?" "I would tell myself that grief does not last forever," Eleanor said, that healing is possible even when you think your heart is too broken to mend. I would tell myself to be brave enough to accept help when it is offered, and to believe that I deserve happiness even after loss. She paused, then added, and I would tell myself to trust the old hound's judgment. Blue knew you were a good man from the start. I should have listened to him sooner. Cole chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest beneath her ear. Blue was always a good judge of character. I miss that old dog. So do I, Eleanor agreed. But his legacy lives on in this family, in this life we built together. He brought us together, and that gift keeps giving year after year. They fell silent then, content simply to hold each other as sleep approached. Eleanor thought about all the years behind them, and the years yet to come, however many they might have. She thought about their children building their own lives and their grandchildren growing up with the security and love that both she and Cole had lacked in their younger years. She thought about the patients she had treated, the lives she had saved or eased, the difference she had been able to make because she stopped running from her grief and started building toward her future. And she thought about that day in July of 1872 when she found a dying hound beneath a cottonwood tree and made the choice to help him. Such a small decision, such a simple act of compassion, and yet it had changed the course of her entire life. It had brought her Cole and their children, this ranch and their community standing, the respect of her neighbors and the satisfaction of meaningful work. It had brought her love when she thought she was done with loving, and hope when she had given up on hoping. As Eleanor drifted off to sleep, safe in her husband's arms, she sent up a silent prayer of thanks for that hot July afternoon, for the old hound who refused to give up, and for the cowboy who had spoken words that became a prophecy. That dog and I both owe you everything. The years continued their steady march forward, bringing the turn of the century and all the changes that came with it. Cole and Eleanor celebrated their 25th anniversary in 1898 with a party thrown by their children, a grand affair that brought together people from all over the county. They stood together and renewed their vows in front of God and family, their love as strong as ever despite the silver in their hair and the lines etched deep in their faces. In 1900, Eleanor finally retired from active healing practice, passing her remaining patients to Sarah and her husband at the hospital. She spent her days tending her garden, reading, and most importantly, spoiling her growing number of grandchildren. There were 8 of them now, ranging in age from 13 down to 2, and each one held a special place in her heart. Cole reduced his own workload as well, turning more of the ranch's daily operations over to James while he focused on breeding horses, a passion he had developed in his later years. He had a good eye for bloodlines and an instinct for which animals would produce the strongest offspring. His horses became sought after throughout Kansas and the surrounding territories, bringing in steady income that ensured the family's financial security. They celebrated the new century together on New Year's Eve of 1900, gathering all 3 of their children and their families at the ranch for a party that lasted well into the night. As midnight struck and the church bells in town rang out to mark the turning of the century, Cole pulled Eleanor into his arms and kissed her soundly, to the cheers and laughter of their family. "Another century ahead of 'em," he said when they broke apart. "Think we will make it through this one as well as we did the last?" "As long as we are together, we can face anything," Eleanor replied, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. The first decade of the new century brought both joys and sorrows. Cole's health began to decline in 1903, his body showing the wear of decades of hard work. He developed a persistent cough that winter, and despite all of Eleanor's and Sarah's skill, it took weeks to finally clear. He recovered, but he was never quite as strong afterward, and Eleanor noticed him tiring more easily. They lost Thomas unexpectedly in 1905 when a fall from a horse resulted in injuries that not even Sarah's advanced medical knowledge could treat. The loss devastated the entire family, but especially Cole, who blamed himself for teaching his sons to be cowboys in the first place. Eleanor held him through his grief, reminding him gently that Thomas had died doing something he loved, living the life he had chosen freely. But there were joys too. More grandchildren arrived, and then the first great-grandchildren, babies who represented the future and the continuation of everything Cole and Eleanor had built together. James proved himself a capable rancher, expanding their holdings and modernizing their operations. Sarah's hospital grew to include multiple doctors and nurses, serving a region that stretched for hundreds of miles. Even Thomas's widow remarried eventually, to a good man who cherished her and her daughters, ensuring that Thomas's legacy lived on through his children. Eleanor and Cole celebrated their 40th anniversary in 1913, surrounded by family that now numbered in the dozens. They sat together on the porch of their ranch house in the same chairs they had occupied for decades, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Their hands were clasped together, fingers intertwined, holding each other with the gentle certainty of 4 decades of marriage. 40 years, Eleanor marveled. Sometimes it feels like forever, and sometimes it feels like it has only been a moment. Best 40 years of my life, Cole said, his voice rougher now with age, but still carrying the same warmth it had always held when he spoke to her. Every single day with you has been a gift, Eleanor. Even the hard days, even the days when we disagreed or struggled, because we faced them together. I never thought I would have this, Eleanor admitted. After my first husband died, I thought my chance at happiness had died with him. I was so wrong. You showed me that love does not run out, that the heart has room for multiple chapters. You gave me a second chance when I thought I was done with chances. Cole raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. You saved my life in more ways than one, he said. When you found Blue that day, you found me too. I was lost, Eleanor, drifting without purpose or direction. You gave me roots. You gave me a reason to stop running and start building. Everything I am, everything we have created together, it all started because you had the compassion to help a dying dog. Tears slipped down Eleanor's cheeks, but they were tears of joy, of gratitude for a life well lived, and a love that had endured through decades of trials and triumphs. That dog and I both owe you everything, she quoted softly, repeating the words Cole had spoken so long ago. You said that to me 41 years ago, but you were wrong. We owed each other. We saved each other. Cole's own eyes were damp as he nodded. We did. And I would do it all again, every hardship, every challenge, every moment of fear or pain, because it led me to you and to this life. They sat together as the stars emerged. 2 old people who had loved each other through the turning of decades, who had built a legacy that would outlast them both. The ranch around them hummed with life, with the voices of their descendants, with the future they had created together through love and determination, and an old hound dog who had brought them together. Cole Maddox passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1915 at the age of 73. He died as he had lived his later years, with Eleanor beside him, her hand in his. His last words were, "I love you," and Eleanor took comfort in knowing that he had died happy, surrounded by family, secure in the knowledge that everything he had built would continue. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, testimony to the respect and affection Cole had earned throughout his life. They buried him on the ranch he loved, beneath a young cottonwood tree that Eleanor had planted years earlier as a reminder of where their story had begun. The gravestone read simply, Cole Maddox, beloved husband, father and grandfather, 1842 to 1915. Eleanor lived for 3 more years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, writing down the stories of her life so that future generations would know where they had come from. She wrote about Missouri and her first marriage, about the journey west and finding Blue beneath that cottonwood tree. She wrote about falling in love with Cole, about their wedding and the births of their children, about building the ranch and weathering the storms that life brought their way. She wrote about the value of compassion, of taking the time to help even when it would be easier to walk away. She wrote about second chances and the courage it takes to open your heart after loss. She wrote about the importance of family and community, of putting down roots and building something that would outlast your own lifetime. And she wrote about love, the kind of love that grows deeper with time, that is built on respect and partnership and choosing each other every single day. She wrote about the kind of love that starts with a simple act of kindness and grows into something that spans decades and touches countless lives. Eleanor joined her husband in death on a cool autumn morning in 1918 at the age of 75. She died in the bedroom she had shared with Cole for so many years, surrounded by her children who had rushed to her side when they realized the end was near. Her last words were about Cole, about seeing him again, and there was a smile on her face as she took her final breath. They buried her beside Cole beneath the cottonwood tree, and the entire county turned out to mourn and celebrate a woman who had touched so many lives through her healing and her kindness. The gravestone they placed beside Cole's read, Eleanor Brennan Maddox, beloved wife, mother, and healer, 1843 to 1918. She saved more than bodies. The ranch continued under James's stewardship, and then his sons after him, remaining in the family for generations. The hospital that Sarah and her husband had built grew into a regional medical center, serving thousands of patients over the decades. Thomas's daughters and their children carried on his adventurous spirit, spreading throughout the West and building their own legacies. And on the anniversary of that July day in 1872, when a widow woman had found a dying hound and changed the course of multiple lives, the family gathered at the graves beneath the cottonwood tree. They told the story to the youngest members, ensuring that the tale of compassion and courage and love would never be forgotten. They talked about Blue, the old hound who had brought two broken people together. They talked about Eleanor's kindness and Cole's devotion. They talked about the life their ancestors had built through determination and partnership. The story became family legend, passed down from grandparents to grandchildren, a tale of how a simple act of mercy had created a legacy that stretched across generations. It was a reminder that the smallest choices can have the greatest consequences, that taking the time to help another creature in need can change the course of not just one life, but many. And always when they told the story, they included Cole's words, the statement that had become the family's motto, "That dog and I both owe you everything." It was a reminder of gratitude, of debt that could never be fully repaid, of the interconnectedness of all lives. It was a reminder to be kind, to be compassionate, to never walk past someone or something in need without offering help. The cottonwood tree continued to grow, its branches spreading wide over the graves of Cole and Eleanor Maddox, sheltering them in death as their love had sheltered each other in life. And beneath that tree, the family that had sprung from a widow's compassion and a cowboy's love continued to gather, year after year, celebrating the legacy of two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful and lasting from the simple foundation of caring for an old hound in need. Their story had a happy ending, not because their lives were without struggle or sorrow, but because they faced everything together with love and courage and unwavering commitment to each other. They proved that second chances are real, that healing is possible, that love can bloom even in the harshest conditions if given the chance to take root. And it all started with an act of kindness on a hot July afternoon, when a woman stopped to help a creature in need and found in return everything she had thought she lost forever.